Shalom. Welcome. I'm Rabbi Scott with Beth Yeshua Messianic Synagogue in Fort Myers, Florida. We are reissuing the Revelation series that was taught by Rabbi Jim Pickens here at Beth Yeshua over the course of the last 2 years or so. We feel these messages are especially relevant in these tumultuous times, and we hope and pray that Adonai uses them to strengthen you and to encourage you. If you are currently a supporter of this ministry, we would like to say thank you. We appreciate your partnership with us as we all labor together in the work of the gospel of Yeshua in the kingdom here on earth. If you would like to support us, you will find a link below in the video description. Once again, we hope that this is a blessing to you. If you have any questions, you will find an email address. If you have any dialogue or discussion, you'll find an email address in the video description below. Please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. And now I will give you the Revelation series with Rabbi Jim Pickens. Shalom.
All right. Tonight we take up chapter 6 of Zechariah. Chapter 6 of Zechariah is Vision 8, the last of the visions of this introductory part of the book of Zechariah. And there's a lot of detail being given about the time just before Messiah comes and about the millennium period itself. And some of it, as you're going to see, seems to be just floating. It's just kind of hanging there, not connected with anything, not attached anywhere yet. But consider that when we look in the New Testament, it's only in Revelation 20 that we have the 1,000-year period mentioned where Yeshua is reigning over the earth. And Revelation 20 gives us absolutely no detailed information as we go through it. So what this book of Zechariah and these visions are doing is giving us detailed information about the period just before this 1,000 years and about the millennium itself, how it's structured. So we need this detail that we're going to get this evening, and well, what we've gotten up to this point, we're going to need this for application later as we go on with the study. So with that in mind, let us look at chapter 6. The first part of the chapter is Vision 8. The second part of this chapter 6 is an oracle where God directs Zechariah to make certain statements. But first, the vision. Let's begin with having Zechariah 6:1 up, please. Again I raised my eyes, and I saw in front of me 4 chariots coming out from between 2 mountains, and the mountains were mountains of bronze. Notice how the language here starts exactly as the language in chapter 5, verse 1. At the start of the 6th vision about the flying scroll, it says, again I raised my eyes, except that this time Zechariah is seeing 4 chariots come from between 2 bronze mountains. And the term 4 here is the number of chariots. In the number of chariots, I guess I should put it that way, the term 4 here in the number of chariots really points to the 4 horses. That's the subject that we want to home in on, our groups of horses. We're going to look at that in verse 2 in just a minute. And that term 4 speaks about totality. We're looking at totality in that number 4. We looked at the 4 artisans in the second vision. We'll also see that same sort of thing of the 4 artisans, that the 4 horses that we're going to look at in a minute, they're accompanied by the chariots. That's how I want you to think about this. It's not the horses and the chariots. These horses are accompanied by the chariots instead of being accompanied by riders, as we saw in Vision 1, and as we'll discuss in a little bit. This 8th vision corresponds to the first vision. The first vision had riders with the horses. This vision introduces the concept of chariots with the horses, and that is a shift in symbolic function, if you will. The difference between having the riders or having the chariots. The chariots produce in this taking it out to a global scope. In other words, what's going on here with these horses and chariots is looking at this in a global scope. Picture of divine omnipotence. The chariot was a vehicle associated with political sovereignty. It was a war vehicle and part of a ruler's military equipment. It's believed that the chariot was instrumental in allowing the creation of the great imperial states that emerged, that we've looked at as Babylon and Persia and the Greeks and the Romans that followed. The military aspects of the chariot really can't be overlooked. The chariot used militarily represents the ultimate and absolute sovereignty over the territory ruled, in that that sovereign can forcibly carry out his policies. He's got the power. It's like the chariot was the tank of the day, allowing whoever controlled them to control those around them. So the sovereign can forcibly carry out his policies and exercise dominion over what he controls or rules. And that's the symbolism, really, I guess, that we want to look at in the chariot. It represents more than just a two-wheeled, horse-drawn vehicle. The text then tells us that these four chariots come out from between two bronze mountains. The term "from between" actually bears looking at also. And from between, for you grammar majors, from between comes from a compound preposition in the Hebrew. The word from indicates a direction from which movement occurs. This is not saying that these chariots merely pass between a pair of mountains. This is saying that the chariots are moving out and away from the mountains where they originated. That's what this is telling us in the structure of the language. These chariots are moving out and away from the mountains where they originated and are moving out towards a distinct goal. The imagery is such that God is associated with the two mountains. Some suggest that the two mountains represent the gateway to heaven or the cosmic dwelling place of God. In the Stone Edition Tanakh, in their comments, they take the position that these four chariots are really the four empires that were listed in Daniel, the four Gentile empires. But as we go along, you're going to note that the rest of the vision dispels that theory. Finally, in this verse, these mountains are bronze. These mountains are of bronze. Now, in the Hebrew word used here is for copper, which is the basic metal that brass and bronze are made of, by mixing in other metals to form an alloy. An alloy referring to bronze. As bronze is well known for its shining quality. That's where they're going with this. It's believed that the notable feature here is the shining appearance of the mountains as if illuminated by the sun's rays. These mountains where the chariots are coming out from are gleaming, and the thought is that God's presence is clearly being shown through the brilliance coming off of these bronze mountains. Now, that God's presence is clearly shown here is a comparison to the darkness and secrecy of the horses in the first vision. You remember in the first vision, the horses and riders were secluded. They were in the shadows. They were hidden in the trees. It's like God was operating at that time in a stealth mode. In that first vision. Here, everything is in the open. Shining mountains, chariots coming out from them. On then to Zechariah 6, verses 2 and 3, please. The first chariot had red horses, the second chariot black horses, the third chariot white horses, and the fourth chariot spotted gray horses. Spotted gray horses there is a bad translation. We're going to tear it apart. We're going to tear it apart. Some believe that the 4 colors of the horses are given to correspond to the 4 points of the compass. Again, an image of totality. The 4 sets of horses here match with the 4 horses in the first vision, except that their colors aren't the same, so don't let that mess with your mind. Here, the first 3 colors of the horses, which are red, black, white, don't present any problem in translation because they are color words in the Hebrew. But the 4th Hebrew word, however, is barudim, which isn't an actual color word. That's where they're getting the spotted gray horses from in this translation. Some translations say spotted, some say dappled. Barudim actually denotes a pattern. Denotes a pattern and appears to be out of place with the color words of red, white, and black, but is actually used in many places to denote patterns in animals. Remember the story of Jacob and Laban where there were spotted sheep? Boradim is used there. It means patterned or spotted, and here probably means a multi-colored thing, a patterned thing that has more than one color designation. But there's one problem. Most all of the text have it, that one problem, not all. Most translate a word at the very end of the verse in the Hebrew text, amutzim. That word amutzim they translate as gray. That's where we get spotted gray horses. Snatch the gray out of there and you get rid of the problem. Spotted horses is really what's being said. The complete Jewish Bible has red, white, black, and spotted gray horses, and this word amutzim, though, is a plural of amas, which means strong or powerful. And that's what we need to be looking here rather than gray. Amutzim actually is an adjective, masculine plural. So why not, instead of red, white, black, and spotted gray horses, shouldn't we have red, white, black, and spotted horses, all of them powerful? Why shouldn't we have in this, and I believe it is correct, red, white, black, and spotted horses, all of them powerful? Hang on to that thought until we get down to verse 7, and I think you'll see why all of them powerful is better translation than the gray, which really doesn't work. All right, Zechariah 6, still verses 4 and 5. I asked the angel speaking with me, "What are these, my Lord?" And the angel answered me, "These are the 4 winds of the sky that go out after presenting themselves before the Lord of all the land." Well, all of a sudden, these 4 horses and chariots and stuff that we're talking about are really representing 4 winds that go out after presenting themselves before the Lord of all the land. Remember, wind in the Hebrew is ruach. So these are the 4 ruachs that are going out. Responding to the vision, Zechariah here asks the angel, "What are these?" And there's wordplay going on here. These 4 chariots and horses are then described as the 4 ruachs. That is, the 4 spirits. Now, ruach can also mean breath and wind and so forth. So we could say that there's some wordplay going on here, that they represent 4 spirits / winds of the sky. But also, these are 4 ruachs, are winds of God. There are various translations. Some say heavens instead of skies, the 4 spirits of heavens. There's a cosmic dimension here. All creation as a whole is being looked at, not just the earth. It seems as these ruachs encompass the whole of creation. It's going to be not just within the physical earth, but also within the spirit realm that we would refer to perhaps as the heavenlies. Now consider that the four winds / ruachs of the sky is a totality of all directions. They go everywhere. And the thought of movement, speed, and strength is the mental image created here. The use of 4 chariots and 4 teams of horses along with the 4 winds creates an image of God's omnipresence and omnipotence, of God's sovereignty over all of his creation. That's what all these things are really showing the person that is steeped in Hebrew. If we couple this with God's omniscience from Vision 1, this ties Vision 1 and Vision 8 together. Here they, the Ruach, wind spirits, go out as surveillance over all of God's creation, gathering all the information that's out there, allowing God to know everything. So if we couple Vision 1 and Vision 8 together, we have the omnipresence, the omnipotence, the omniscience of God. So we need to see how 1 and 8 work together. We're looking at the pattern of all these visions in just a few minutes. I'm going to draw them on this board next to us. The Hebrew word for winds or spirits here is ruchot. Ruchot. It's a plural of ruach. So we have plural of the ruachs. We have more than one ruach. We have more than one spirit involved. We have more than one wind involved, yet they're all coming from the same source. Out from between the bronze mountains, behind which I think we would find God because of the brilliance of that. Remember in Genesis 1:2, it tells us that it is the Ruach Elohim that is hovering over the vastness of the unformed creation. This is what these same 4 Ruachs are doing over the creation now that it's in place. This is a plural of Ruach here, showing movement out over the creation in every direction. We could stay here and play with this for a long time. This language allows for some real depth. But think of what it says back in Zechariah 4:6, that's Vision 5. Right at the core of what these visions point to is not by might, not by power, that's man's might and man's power, but by my Ruach. By my Ruach, that things are going to happen, things are going to go on. These Ruchot, the plurality of the Ruach, go out after presenting themselves before the Lord, and they go out from standing or being stationed in God's presence, if you will, in Elohim's presence, from standing in the presence of the Lord of all the earth. Each of these chariots with their various colored horses go forth then from his presence. The origin of these is with God himself, that expressing God's universal authority. How confused are we at this point? Stay with me. Zechariah 6:6. The one with the black horses is going out towards the land of the north. The white horses have gone out after them, and the spotted have gone out towards the land of the south. Read that through quickly one more time. The one with the black horses is going out towards the land of the north. The white horses have gone out after them, and the spotted have gone out toward the land of the south. Note something. The chariot with the red horses is not mentioned here. Is it excluded? We'll see. Now follow this closely because it gets a little complex here. This phrase, the one, refers to the chariots. The one with the black horses is the chariot with the black horses. Same thing is specified before each horse group. Language structure is telling us something here. The one with is the chariots. The one with is the feminine singular, in the feminine singular. And the term going out is in the masculine plural and refers to horses, not chariots. Because horses are also in the masculine. Because the chariots are in the feminine, the structure of the language eliminates them. We're interested really in the horses that are going out. The chariots are being diminished, making the horses the subject of the phrase. It's a Hebrew structure thing. And the black horses with their chariot are going to the land to the north. The Hebrew used here is the word for earth combined with a word that gives direction. Many think that this is towards Babylon and Persia, which would be modern Iraq and Iran, because the land of the north means the nations or empires at the end of the eastern end, I should say, the eastern end of the Fertile Crescent. These old eastern armies would go west up the Euphrates River and around the top of the desert before attacking Israel from the north. Hence they were thought of as lands that attack from the north, even though they came from the east. Now, that's what some think these are, that this is those lands, those empires, speaking of the lands that those empires of the east had been on. Ancient Babylon and Persia. Not Russia, but thinking of modern Iran and Iraq as being the ones that are involved in what this is looking at. In the next phrase, the white horses go out after them. And then the spotted go to the south. Incorrect, but the NIV translates white horses go towards the west, and the spotted horses towards the south. But in the Hebrew, there are only two directions mentioned. In the Hebrew, there are only two directions mentioned. So the complete Jewish Bible got this one right. It mentions only two directions. The Hebrew has nothing going to the west. What happens, I think, is in the general context of the four chariots, that seems to indicate the whole world is to be covered, and so the translators take it upon themselves to send them out in all directions, finding a new direction for the white horses. None of the Jewish translations that I'm familiar with have more than north and south. The black horses go north, the white horses go after them. Now, remember that little translation snafu we looked at up back in verse 3 about the spotted gray horses? Okay, watch this. Note that the last thing it says here in verse 6 is that the spotted horses go south. Now, Zechariah 6:7, please. Then the gray ones went out and were seeking to go and wander throughout the whole earth. When he said wander throughout the whole earth, and they did wander through the whole earth. Read that again. Then the gray ones went out and were seeking to go and wander throughout the whole earth. When he, that would be God, said to them, wander throughout the whole earth. And they did wander throughout the whole earth. God's given them permission to go do this, wander throughout the whole wide earth. All right. If the spotted horses go south, which they did just above in verse 6, and the gray horses go to all the earth, how can we justify spotted gray horses on the fourth chariot back up in verse 3 going in a specific direction? See what I'm talking about? A number of translations here have powerful horses go out and wander through the whole earth. And we're using that same word again as in verse 3. And the powerful horses went out and were seeking to wander the whole earth. And God said, go to it, and they did. That's what is in the original language, I believe. This would seem to indicate that all the chariots pulled by all the horses went out, including the red. The mighty ones would be a characteristic of the whole group of the 4 horse and chariot combinations. Went out here seems to have an impetus, I guess, of straining or eager to get about the business at hand. The imperatives here, go and roam throughout, are all in the masculine plural, as is went out. And all of this refers to the horses because the horses are in the masculine. Again, a thing of structure in the Hebrew. The contrast of the horses in the first vision and the 8th vision is interesting. The first vision describes a thorough but covert surveillance of God's domain. It talks about him being in the shadows if you remain. But in the 8th division, the roaming of these horses drawing chariots is overt, not covert, but overt, out in the open. It talks about him coming out of mountains of bronze with chariots. Hard to hide that kind of stuff. The roaming of the first vision indicates that the horse can go anywhere it seeks as it seeks to observe events of the whole world. This 8th vision implies a more regular patrolling pattern, not just going where they want to look at a specific thing, but a regular patrolling pattern that keeps going on constantly. It's kind of like the beat cops fixed rounds. Why are they wandering in the open? Well, if we think about the millennium period, and if we go to Isaiah, and we're not going to go to Isaiah tonight, so I'm going to have you please copy down all these Isaiah references that I'll be giving you and look them up as homework. If we go to Isaiah, we learn a lot about the millennium. Like people, we're going to live a long time during the millennium. If we die under 100, it'll be because we're sinful. Satan will be locked up, but we'll still have our sinful nature to deal with, still capable of sinning. And there will be death on the earth during that period of time. But death at 100 will almost be like dying as an infant. We'll see in Revelation that during this time the world will be ruled with an iron rod. So a thought could be that these patrols, the 8th vision, are actual patrols throughout the world during this time of being ruled with the iron rod. See, before man was being observed covertly, here men are being observed overtly. Keeps the plowshares from being beaten back into spears, if you will, through this observation. One sees the God's chariots go by, they're kind of reluctant not to get involved in going against him. All that's food for thought. All that's food for thought. Zechariah 6:8 now, please. Then he called out to me and said, look, the ones going to the land of the north have given my spirit rest in the north country. Now, the north country we established a few minutes ago is really probably that area of Iran and Iraq that was originally Persia and Babylon and those things. And the ones going to the land of the north have given my spirit rest in the north country. Which ones are going to the land of the north? Remember the 2 angels that picked up the sealed ephah with the evil ones in it that we looked at last week or 2 weeks ago? Think about this. This is God's active hand in the world through the action of his Ruach. It gives him rest. An ancient enemy that came down to attack from the north has finally suppressed. That area where demonic activity had been centered has had a lead lid put on it. And I'm going to beat this into the ground. Remember the end of chapter 5, the ephah with the lead lid being planted in Iraq, carried there by 2 female angels. Victory over the north country is victory over every evil foe. Nothing can now stand in the way of salvation during that millennial period. And we'll end visions with that. But before we start on the oracles, I want to draw you a chart. I want you to look at it, chart to look at. I'm going to do it briefly if I can. I want you to see how the structure is made up in which these visions are presented, and how that structure magnifies what's being said here and points to the climactic events. We've already spent a lot of time with the 1st and 8th visions here already, so you kind of see how they interrelate or mirror. We're going to call vision 1, V1 here on the chart is vision 1. We're going to call this A. And down here at vision 8, we're going to call this A prime. Reason for A and A prime is because they have similarities here that are extremely strong. All right. Horses of different colors covering the world, showing God's omnipotence, omnipresence, and omnipatience. So, we've got horses in vision 1 that we're covertly watching. And in vision 8, we've got horses again, which are overtly watching what's going on. See how those 2 bracket? They're the same thing, but doing things in different ways, bracketing that. Now, the second vision, V2 here, we'll call B, and V7, vision 7, we'll call B prime. Again, we're doing this because there's similarities in what was going on. In vision 2, you'll remember, was the 4 artisans that came to deal with the horns that were coming against Israel, and the horns that were coming against Israel were evil nations, being representative of the evil nations that were coming against Israel. 4 being representative of completeness, and the nations doing evil were completely overthrown. Verse 7 is talking about, as we just mentioned, that ephah of dry measure, that the fullness of sin with the lead lid on it. That's talking about evil in the spirit being overthrown. So, vision 1, vision 8, we've got the horses in play that are doing these things. In vision 2 and vision 7 is nations of evil being destroyed, being pointed to being destroyed. And vision 7, evil in the spirit also being taken away, removed, if you will. Evil itself is overthrown. The nations doing evil were overthrown. Then there's a vision 3, which we'll call C. Vision 3 is C. Vision 6 is C prime. We've got a line of measure in vision 3. That line of measure indicated action was being taken. In vision 6, we've got flying scroll. Remember the flying scroll? Action. The 2 are different, but they're doing the same thing. Now then, if we keep this going, we can't, for lack of a better term, we can't escape of what our attention's being drawn to. Vision 4, we'll call D. Vision 5, we'll call D prime. In vision 4, we have a high priest whose filthy garments have been taken off of him and replaced by clean garments. The filth is the sin taken away from the world. The sin taken away from the world. In vision 5, we have a descendant or son of David who comes and rebuilds the temple. So, we've got high priest, filth taken. What's that point to? First coming of Yeshua. In the second one, we've got a descendant of David who rebuilds the tent. Son of David rebuilds temple. That's pointing to the second coming of Yeshua. Both of these together, as we're forced to move into this center section by the structure of the Hebrew, ends up giving everything, beginning with the horses, the nations and the spirit, the actions taken and everything, forces us down to a point where it is only through Yeshua that this is going to take place. You see how the structure of the Hebrew makes this happen. Structure of the Hebrew just makes this happen. We had no choice but to come to here. If we follow this now, most of the, not all, but a lot of the parables that Yeshua teaches in the Gospels are this same structure. You got two things, but the actual subject, the important part, is right in the middle between this. Next time you're looking at parables, lay them out like this and think about that. Think about that. This is called inverted parallelism. Inverted parallelism. Parallelism that's inverted, pointing in towards the center. It forces us to the center. All this has really occurred because of actions taken. What was the action? Look at the center. Messiah Yeshua. Vision 4 is the first coming, sins wiped away. Vision 5 is the second coming, crown earned. He is king. The climax of all that is being shown here. The climax of all that is being shown here. Now I want you to take note of something. This is circular thinking. We have just been drawn in and brought into the center of this thing, but we can also, because it's circular thinking, we can start at the center and we can work our way out. We can work our way out. What has happened at the center of this Messiah Yeshua? It's the action that caused the sin and evil to be overthrown in both the physical and the spiritual, so that there's nothing left but the omniscient, omnipresent, omnipatient God ruling his creation, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. If you want to get into this a little bit more, we'll do it when this gets done. We've still got the rest of this chapter to do tonight. Give me Zechariah 6, 9, and 10, please. This message from Adonai came to me. Take gifts from the exiles, Heldai, Toviah, and Yadayah, who have arrived from Babylon. Then you, that's talking to Zechariah, go to the house of Joshua, the son of Zephaniah, the son of Zephaniah. Whoa, that was a mouthful. Verse 9 is simply an introduction. God is speaking directly to Zechariah. Do this. Then it speaks to the new arrivals from Babylon bearing gifts for the needy returned community in Jerusalem. We can see Zechariah no longer is going to have to deal with mysterious figures or visions which require angels and and supernatural interpretation, but now Zechariah is among people he can identify within a place that is known to him. And these gifts could be just from those that are named here that have come back, or they could be from the entire Jewish community of Babylon, with these that are named in this verse as the representatives that delivered the gifts. One thing that all three have in common, all three of these delivering the gifts, is they are in the category of returnees. They are now back. The verse ends with instructions to Zechariah to go to the house of Yoshia, that is Josiah. I said Joshua in error earlier. Go to the house of Josiah, the son of Zephaniah. The son of Zephaniah. I think I gave you Hotzak earlier, which would be an error. The indication is that it is to be right away, as soon as he gets these gifts handed to him, he is to go to the house of Josiah, of Zephaniah, the same day that the newcomers arrive from Babylon. God's instructions are direct here, when to come and when to go. The verbs here are in the singular, and they refer to the prophet. Take the gold and silver, which will be identified in the next verse, and go immediately to Josiah with the exiles as witnesses. Zechariah 6:11. Take silver and gold, make crowns, put one on the head of Yehoshua, Joshua, the son of Yehotzadek, the Kohen HaGadol. Take silver and gold, make crowns, put one on the head of Yehoshua, the son of Yotzadek, the high priest. The high priest. First thing, that word make is in the singular and probably directed at Zechariah. Not that Zechariah himself would make the crowns, but is responsible to see that it is done by craftsmen who would form them. The word crowns here is in plural, although some translations will try to make it singular. Some translators, such as NIV, render it a single crown of both gold and silver, and place it on Yehoshua, the high priest's head. But the concept of a crown made of mixed gold and silver would never have been accepted in the ancient Near East, because the concept is, if you mix anything together, you lower its quality. You lower what it's representing. It would be unacceptable for either a high priest or a king to wear a crown that was mixed. The Hebrew definitely states crowns plural, so we have to assume a crown of gold that would be placed on Yehoshua's head, and at least one crown of silver being made. Probably more than one of silver, as we'll see when we get to verse 14. It appears then that there are to be made crowns of gold and silver. The significance of the gold crown is not difficult to imagine for a high priest or a king. Since this passage is going to shadow the coming Messiah, the gold crown would be obvious. But what is the significance of the silver or silver crowns? Well, we're not sure. We're not sure. I'm not sure at this point. The Yehoshua here is the one that is mentioned in the fifth vision, Zechariah 3:5, at the center or climatic point of the 8 visions. We also need to remember that the high priest called Yehoshua here is called Yeshua in Ezra and Nehemiah. Yehoshua being a variation of Yeshua. If you take the word Yeshua, spread it out and stick another syllable in, you get Yehoshua. Remember, at the time, at the center, our climactic point of the 8 visions, a turban was placed on the head of Yehoshua, the Kohen Gadol. It was not the usual word for priestly turban as given in Exodus 29:36 that was used, but a relatively obscure word indicating headgear for royal use, not priestly use. In Isaiah 62:3, this word is translated diadem, modified by the word royal, indeed a royal diadem. A royal diadem is a headband worn as a badge of royalty. And the issue here is the same as the one back in chapter 3. Why is a high priest receiving a royal crown? Take silver and gold, make crowns, put one on the head of Yehoshua, the son of Yehotzedek, the Kohen Gadol. Give me 12, please. And tell him, Adonai Tzavaot says there is coming a man whose name is Samach, sprout. He will sprout up from his place and rebuild the temple of Adonai. You see, this is obviously all pointing towards Yeshua Messiah. Here is the second part of the climactic point of the 8 visions. Vision 5, the temple or the house of God being rebuilt. Zechariah is to transmit a specific word of God here. He is to place the gold crown on the head of the high priest and then tell the high priest what this crown means. There is a man coming whose name is Samach. Remember who Yehoshua is picturing here, the coming Samach. This ties the crown being placed on the head of Yehoshua the high priest. It's like all in the same breath, all in the same word, used in Vision 6, chapter 3:8, with Samach, the sprout of the branch. The crown is associated with this sprout. So he is actually being walked through this as a representation of the coming Messiah. It says here in verse 12, he will sprout, that is the Samach that's coming, he will sprout up from his place and rebuild the temple or the house of God. We need to note that the word for temple here is hakal, not that common. It speaks to the whole building or structure. Hakal is a variation of hekel. Hakal is speaking to the whole structure, and it means palace or big house, not just a little temple that had been in place. I take that to represent maybe even more than just the physical temple, perhaps talking about the whole house of God made up of both Jews and Gentiles, coming together in a royal palatial dwelling place of God. We know from Isaiah 66:21 that the Gentiles will be priests in this temple that Samach comes back and builds. Remember when we started off this evening, we looked at this being information to apply to the time immediately before and during the millennium. I think now that we can see how this can apply to that. Yeshua reigning in Jerusalem during the millennium is what this is all pointing to. And I think that this language now is making some sense to us. I hope it is. Zechariah 6:13. Yes, he, that is the Samach, that is the coming returning Messiah, will rebuild the temple of Adonai. He will take up royal splendor, setting and ruling from his throne. There will be a Kohen before his throne, and they will accept each other's advice in complete harmony. That last sentence is like, there will be a Kohen before his throne, and they will accept each other's advice in complete harmony. No. He, Messiah, is going to be sitting on his throne and ruling. Let's break this down a little bit. Let's break this down just a little bit. We're talking about the Zemach here, the sprout from the line of David. The shoot that will come forth from the stump of Jesse, Jesse the father of David. Taking this back a generation before David just to make sure there's no doubt as to where this comes from. Now this Yehoshua, the high priest, that has had the gold royal crown placed on his head, is being told this. He's being told all this. That he, the sprout that will rebuild the temple of Adonai, is repeated for emphasis. And the house of God will be rebuilt by the sprout who is Messiah. Call him the general contractor. It is he who will be responsible for rebuilding the temple, the house of God. And the temple is going to be different than the previous one. This temple is going to be a manifestation of royalty. The gold crown on Yehoshua's, the high priest's head shows this, and this sprout will set and rule from this temple in royal splendor, sitting on the throne as both king and high priest from a building that is both temple and a palace. Ezekiel chapter 40 through 48 describe this place for us, this temple palace. We need to read this as homework. We also need to look at this phrase, there will be a Cohen before his throne. Others translate this, he will be a priest on his throne. How can this happen? Well, such a difference in translation. Well, let's start with this direct article A that's up there. There will be a Cohen before his throne. That A does not appear in the Hebrew. More translators help for us. So this then becomes, there will be Cohen before his throne. That still isn't correct. Cohen here is in the singular. Then the word before becomes troubling. Before could also correctly be translated as on. However, this then gives us, there will be a Cohen on his throne. That leaves us with options on how to translate this. Could this be a priest that is on a par with the sprout, sitting on his throne? Two men, the priestly and royal characters that are on the same level? Well, everything that we've looked at up to this point says no. The context of Scripture really doesn't allow for that to take place. He, if we look at it correctly, speaking of Yeshua, will be Cohen on his throne. But then there's the rest of this verse, which is also incorrect, made incorrect. They will accept each other's advice in complete harmony. Terrible translation. The key here is in the term complete harmony. Complete harmony is legal. Seems to indicate two individuals working together in unprecedented harmony to some that are looking at it. So the tendency is they want to translate it that way. But it doesn't fit into the overall picture given across Scripture, and Scripture never argues with itself. So, why can't it be that it is both offices that have harmony in the one person? And that is it. Both offices have harmony in the one person, Messiah Yeshua, who will be both king, ruling the world, and high priest as he returns and sits in this temple. The kingly and priestly office is unified. The sprout who has come will be both high priest and king. Messiah the anointed one, who was anointed in Scripture, Aaron the high priest. David is king. Messiah will be both, hold both offices. Verse 14, please. The other crowns will be for Helem, Toviah, Yadayah, and Hen, the son of Zephaniah. Then they are to be kept as a memorial in the temple of Adonai. The other crowns, possibly the silver ones, since they're not for people identified as royal or priestly. But obviously these are people mentioned here deserving of a reward for God. These crowns are not clearly identified as being gold or silver, but in Revelation 4 we're going to look at 24 elders who are throwing their crowns before the throne of God, and those crowns will be gold. Those crowns will be gold. I think what we're looking at here, the other crowns in Zechariah 6:14, are pointing to crowns given in recognition of people for being who they are in their relationship with our God. Zechariah 6:15. Those who are now far away will come and help rebuild the temple of Adonai. Then you will know that it is Adonai Tzavaot who sent me to you, and it will all come about provided you heed carefully what Adonai your God says. Wow, that's a mouthful. What's meant by those far away is disputed. It's disputed. It is those, actually, who will participate in the rebuilding of the temple, but is it those who are still far in the future time that this is talking about? Or perhaps those that will have to be physically returned to the land from a far dispersion? For instance, B'nai Menashe, the tribe of Manasseh, is being flown back into Israel from northeastern India now by the thousands as we're entering into this final phase. They would be there in time for the rebuilding. The rebuilding of the temple is not a question here. It's going to happen. It will be rebuilt because the sprout, the Messiah, will rebuild it. That's a done deal, waiting to happen. I like that. It's a done deal. It's just waiting to happen. But there's a warning here that the heeding of the community is essential. The heeding of the community is essential. The righteous remnant is the community. The righteous remnant that is doing what it is supposed to be doing. And in that, heeding what they're to be doing is essential. Zechariah says here that when you see this thing occurring, the temple being rebuilt, that will verify that it was Adonai Tzava'ot who sent me. It is the righteous remnant that will see and understand what is going on. I personally feel this goes beyond the building of a physical house, but also include the building of a spiritual house as well. We'll close with that. A lot of information to file away for use as building blocks in future studies, and really as we begin to observe signs of the times that are upon us.